20 chess opening options for black against the move of e4. Let's just go over all of them one by one. We got this move of h6 with a Carr Defense. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is a good move. Okay, I don't think that this really accomplishes much. It does cover the square of g5, which I don't know why we're so worried about it at this point. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a good move. I will say that it's a lot better than some of the other openings that we're about to cover, right? But okay, what does this move do? Well, it does cover g5. Okay, so a knight or a bishop can't jump in there. At some point, if we want to, we can play the move of g5 ourselves, right? But that being said, at this point in the game, h6 is definitely premature by a long shot. It makes our king side a little bit weak, and we do got to be very careful about our f-pawn, right? We got to be very careful. For example, let's say white takes control of the center. If we move this f-pawn anywhere, guess what? The queen's coming to h5, and in just a couple moves, this game's going to be over. Okay, so is this move of h6 with the Carr defense against e4? Is it terrible? Not in and of itself, but it's not great, and it can drop off pretty quick if we're not careful. Okay, what other options do we have? Well, we got this move h5. In a lot of ways, I'm going to say this is even worse. Okay, for the fact that sure, h5 is covered by the rook, but beyond that, g5 is a huge target now, and it's going to be hard for us to defend it. The only way to defend this square with a pawn now is our f-pawn, and if you've watched Ben Feingold, you know never to move your f-pawn. So this move does not set us up well. I mean, yeah, white can just take control of the center there, play a move like knight f3, eventually, potentially, all the leads, drop a bishop on that spot. I mean, this is just not going to be fun, okay? Going back, when we had that move e4, we got this move g6 with the modern defense. This is actually an opening that I'm a fan of. This is what I was playing for quite a while going into the hippopotamus defense. The way I was playing it, I was fianchettoing that bishop, and then here I was playing d6, e6, tucking my knights, and continuing in that hippo type setup. That being said, though, there's other options here, right? We can play a move like d6 and go into a Pirc. We can play the move of c5 here, right? Putting some pressure on d4 and going into a pterodactyl type game, okay? So there's a lot of good stuff there. So the modern defense, a strong option. Now, the other g-pawn move to g5, I'm not going to sit here and say that's good because it's not. Okay, it's the Borg Defense. I guess it's Grob spelled backwards. I mean, talk about weakening to our short side diagonal, right? I mean, there's two diagonals, in which case our king can get checked in the opening. With this diagonal, we have pawns, but not counting pawns, back rank pieces. What back rank pieces can cover this check? Well, our queen, our bishop, and our knight can all block in a variety of different ways, right? But if we have a check from the short side, none of these pieces are going to be able to help, right? So, already by playing this, the h5 is already very weak, and this diagonal is something that we got to constantly be worried about. What does this move actually do? Nothing great. If anything, it also gives white just another huge target to go after. Okay, so the Borg defense, not very good. Okay. Going back to e4, neither of our f-pawn moves are great. I mean, f6, we got the Barnes defense. If you're high Caro, you can make this work, but f6 doesn't really accomplish anything unless you're, trying to play e5, which you could have just did. Or if you're trying to play g5, if you're trying to support a g5 push, but let's just say that these two don't mix together too well because we just lost the game. Okay. So yeah. Enough said on that move. Now there's this move of f5 with the Duras Gambit. Now this is very interesting because this move is terrible. We're literally losing a pawn, and on top of that, our short side diagonal is extremely weak. But somehow this performs decently okay online. All right, this somehow does okay in online chess. All right, and yeah, I mean, somehow black makes it work. We play a move like knight f6, right? If white plays something like d4, we're going to strike in the center as well. If white looks to defend that pawn, we can play e6 and continue trading down here. Here, black is down a pawn, but we're just going to keep developing and actually get a little bit of an edge in development. I think the biggest issue for the Duras Gambit is when white takes, and then we start seeing moves like bishop e2, right? Just going for that h5 square. And yeah, if we see g6, I mean, white could take. White could also just play d4 because guess what? We can't take this guy. because of bishop h5 with check. So, if your opponent knows what to do against f5, it could be very hard to play with. That being said, in bullet chess specifically, it's a fun opening to play. I'm not going to lie. Okay. What other moves do we got? Well, we got the French defense. I mean, talk about, a solid chess opening that virtually every e4 player hates playing against. If you're an e4 player yourself, please let me know down in the comment section below if you like playing against the French defense. If you do, I would be surprised to think that you're in the majority. Again, I think that most e4 players, including myself for a long time, just don't like playing against the French. And it's because it's so solid, okay? It's just a hard cookie to crack, all right? White plays d4, black plays d5. I mean, great central control here fighting against that e4 pawn. If something like knight c3, there's a lot of different moves that we have, including taking. We could play bishop e4, pinning that knight. If white pushes, we could play a move like c5 and just start ganging up on that d4 pawn quite a bit. And if white ever takes on c5, it's generally not in their favor because e5 is going to become that much more vulnerable. Okay. So yeah, I mean, the French defense, great option. e5, very strong option as well. We see this all the time at the grandmaster level. White playing e4, black playing e5. The thing about e5 that I will warn you about though is that if you're an e4 player, you like playing against e5. Okay, I played e4 nearly my whole life, and I still play it from time to time, obviously. And e5 is just a move that we like to play against as e4 players. It gives us a ton of opening options. Right away, we have the King's Gambit, the Danish Gambit, the Vienna game, which could also lead into the Vienna Gambit, the Bishop's opening, right? We could play Knight f3, and this could lead to stuff like the Scotch game, Scotch Gambit, Evans Gambit, Giocco Piano, Italian game, Roy Lopez. I can name him off, right? Blah, 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 blah. There's just a lot of openings that white can play here. A lot of them are very dangerous, and you're going to have to book up quite a bit if you play the move of e5. Okay, but one way to, just to give this little nugget here, okay, one way that you can kind of limit your theory after e5 is if you see knight f3, not playing knight c6. Okay, because if you see knight c6, there's a ton of different stuff that you could see. But here, if you play a move like knight f6, for example, with the Petrov's defense, now white is the one that might not have the edge, in preparation, right? White will oftentimes take that pawn, and if they do, we can play knight c6 going into, a Stafford Gambit, shout out Eric Rosen, or we could just play the sound move of d6, look to take on e4, and, try to play like Fabio and Caruana, even though we're pretty much all going to not be able to do it, okay? Going back, right, we have this move of e4. e5 is a great option. d6, the Pirc Defense. I have, a lot of you guys on this channel have liked the Pirc. I have a student that's coming in my mind right now that plays the Pirc Defense, and he likes it a lot. This move just takes great control of the dark squares, right? And it's one of those openings where we're giving the opponent the center, but then we're going to attack that center for the rest of the game, right? Here we're playing the move of knight f6. If something like knight c3, we're often going to fianchetto our bishop, castle kingside, start looking at e5 and c5 breaks at some point. Sometimes you got c6 and b5 ideas as well, advancing on the queen side, depending on how you play a system like this. But yeah, I mean, it's just actually pretty hard for white to just steamroll the Pirc if the Pirc player knows what they're doing, okay? If you see something like e5, for example, hey, we're taking, and guess what? We're taking on d1. You'll be surprised how much this kind of stuff happens against a Pirc player. We have knight g4. We're attacking two pawns. White can't defend both, right? White can't defend both. On top of that, white's king cannot castle for the rest of the game. Ours can. And we have a knight very active, okay? So, I mean, black here is just reaching a great position at move 5. Okay. We also have this move of d5 with the Scandinavian Defense. I played this for quite a while as a kid against e takes. I played the move of knight f6, gunning for that d5 pawn. Whole idea being if you play d4, something we can take with the knight, right? That's what I played. And if c4, you have successfully hung on to your pawn, right? Here you could take again, and if you're white, you're up a pawn. But black's going to get great central control. Okay, and oftentimes what happens is white gets this kind of backwards and awkward looking pawn on d3, and we can make a huge target out of it. Okay, and at the very least, we can always break this game open and have a bit of fun. Okay, the computer line is e4. I never played e4. I was always looking at stuff like bishop f5, bishop c5, bishop b4, castling, ganging up on that pawn, and it worked for me great. But this is a line as well. Okay, Okay, you play e4, you take the queen, you capture on e4, you're looking at this guy. Again, white can't castle, right? So, okay, we develop, we're potentially castling with check against that king. Black here with great development, great activity. White here, they're up a pawn, but at what cost? At what cost are you going to be up a pawn, right? Very uncomfortable position to play with as white. Going back, though, I mean, it's worth mentioning, if white takes, knight f6 is not the main line, right? This is not the main move. Tons of players love this move of queen takes d5. Okay, and if we see something like knight c3, we have queen d6 with the Gambit variation. We have queen d8 going all the way back. This has kind of made a comeback lately in terms of the theoretical world of chess. Queen d8 is, it's playable. And then queen a5, right? I mean, this is hard to ignore the main line. Queen a5. We all know that we shouldn't, those of us that have studied chess for a while, we all know that in the opening, we should not be moving our queen out, right? And just throwing our queen around. But this square of a5, it's pretty safe, right? I mean, what piece for white, not pawn, but piece is going to chase this queen around, right? This knight is 4 moves away from going to that square. The bishop can't do nothing. This knight's way out of the way. This bishop, I mean, you could put it on d2, but the queen then can always just kind of reroute a little bit. So this queen's sitting pretty comfortable. We're going to develop here as black. And we have a solid game, okay? So that covers the Scandinavian defense briefly with the move of d5. If you're a positional player, this opening is for you, the Caro-Kann Defense, okay? If you're trying to play positionally sound chess and you're not trying to win the game in 10 moves, the Caro-Kann is a great option, okay? Simply preparing this d5 push, all right? If white takes, we take back. In fact, if white does take, we take back. We have 2 central pawns, they only have 1. Okay, and we have a C file to work with, which is nice. Okay, white, on the other hand, they also get stuff, right? They have an E file. Okay, so there's a little bit of a trade-off there. If white pushes, for example, there's different things we can do, right? We can go into G6. I'm a big fan of this move. Fighting for the light squares like F5. We can play a move like H5. Let's say we see F4, play H5, start staking out those squares, bring the knight to the edge to support these 2 outposts. So that's one way that you can play it. You could also play the move of c5, and this is kind of considered to be an improved French, right? Now, why is that? Well, earlier in the video, we covered the French, and we had the same exact position, except the pawn was on e6. So why would it be an improvement, potentially, depending on who you are, for this pawn to be here? Well, because this bishop can get out. Okay, the French bishop. It's a huge opening term, and it speaks of a bishop that is stuck behind all these light squared pawns, and it oftentimes turns into a big old pawn itself. It's not a pawn, but it definitely feels like it. Well, in this case, this bishop can get out, right? If we see something like knight f3 at some point, first off, taking here is probably pretty good, but we can always think about pinning that knight. Okay, let's say white plays something like c3, right? And then they play the move of knight f3. This is a perfect opportunity to pin that knight to the queen. And then play e6, and guess what? You have more space. You have a c8 square for your rook. Your queen has more room to operate. And black here just with a great game. White can fall apart here pretty quickly. Okay, so that just covers a couple ideas. With the Caro-Kann, we could also see a move here like knight c3, in which case we can take. And the main line is considered bishop f5. In a book that I was reading growing up on the Caro-Kann Defense, I studied this line and tried to play it as black, but I just got crushed. I was never good at this bishop f5 move. I'm a fan of knight f6, and sure, white can, double our pawns up, but from this point, we have pretty simple development going forward. And sure, they're doubled, but at the same time, they're pretty well come together, and they're not very weak. So that's my preference, right? Going a couple moves back. If you do see this, you can try out bishop f5, but that bishop gets kicked around all the time. My recommendation here would be the move of knight f6. Okay, so that's a brief intro again to the move of c6 with the Caro-Kann. Then we got the Sicilian. It's hard to talk about this opening in like a minute or whatever, but I'll just give you the basic idea behind it. Okay, it's the most complicated opening, the most complicated defense in chess by far. If we're talking about theoretical memorization, ideas, systems, this is a monster move. Okay. And I'm not even talking about the sidelines. I'm not even talking about the Alekhine or the Grand Prix or, D4 going into, kind of a Smith-Morra gambit, right? I'm not talking about A3 with the delayed wing. I'm not, I could keep going. let's just talk about the main line. Okay, let's say white plays something like knight f3. I'm going to play d6. Okay, there's a ton of different moves there that we could play. All right, that are pretty strong for black. I always played d6 because I was the Sicilian Najdorf player. I'll show you that right now. But here's the basic idea of the Sicilian. We're fighting for the center, and if you ever push on d4, we're going to take, and when you take back with a knight, for example, we have 2 central pawns, you only have 1. All right, so white here has a 4-pawn chain and a 3-pawn chain. We have a 2 and a 5. And, you know, I myself prefer a 5 and a 2. I prefer a very long pawn chain. I believe growing up, I heard Yasser Seirawan say that he kind of likes the long pawn chain as well. It's just tough when you're going up against 5 pawns side by side. And oftentimes the Sicilian defense is actually better for the Sicilian defense player in the end game, but that doesn't mean that there's not chances in the opening and the middle game. Here with the Najdorf, we have this move of knight f6, attacking that pawn, and when white defends it, we play a6. This was a favorite of Garry Kasparov. He's the one that inspired me to play it. I studied his games like crazy. You know, we're going to play e6, bishop e7, queen c7, tuck this knight, start making space on the queen side as one of the main ideas. But again, I mean, this is a beast of a position to memorize. We got the English opening. We got bishop g5. We got bishop e2. We got bishop c4 with the Sozin. And this is a very sharp position. So this isn't one of those openings that you can just play and, you know, study 10 minutes and then play. Okay, this is one of those openings that you got to put the time in, because if you make one misstep in a lot of these positions, you're simply losing. Okay, going back, right, we covered c5 with the Sicilian defense, trying to give up a flank pawn for a central pawn, but it leads to a very sharp and dynamic game. Next up, we got this move b6 with the Owens defense. I'm a fan of the Owens. I've played it, you know, quite a bit. And yeah, I think it does a good job of just kind of putting a ton of pressure on this e4 pawn quickly. If white defends it with a move like knight c3, my favorite idea is to just go after this knight, right? Go after the knight. If they defend the pawn, all right, well, okay, we're going to attack it again. By the way, before white played bishop d3, we were threatening again to take this pawn because the knight is pinned, right? So white defends it. Okay. We attack it again. If you play something like e5, we can play knight e4. If you defend it, okay, we'll put pressure on it again, right? If you kick our knight around, okay, we'll throw our knight into the center of the board. And even something like bishop takes knight here is just deadly for white, because we're going to take that guy. The queen could take technically, but thanks for the queen. And if the knight, oh wait, the knight can't take because it's pinned to the king. Okay, and when this knight moves, the d4 pawn falls. We're putting, you know, double pressure on that knight on c3. The pawn on e5 is very weak. E4 is well defended. Winning position for black, depending, you know, on how well you play it from this point. Okay, so that covers b6 with the Owens defense. Then we got this move of b5, and on the chess.com database, this doesn't even have a name. Okay, I'm tempted to call it like the Polish defense or something. I'm sure there's, you know, some kind of name for it out there among the people. But b5, why is this a mistake? Because it's the only move that literally just gives up a pawn, besides f5, of course. And there's no, I don't know, there's no, like, I don't know, like, what's the point? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, why, right? Why would you play that, right? I mean, I guess if you're trolling, but besides that, like, if you want to fianchetto your bishop, just fianchetto it, right? Like, you don't gotta give up a pawn to fianchetto, right? I mean, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe one of you guys can enlighten me on why anyone would play that besides trolling. But all right, we got that move. We got a6, St. George defense. I'm actually a fan of this move. I'm thinking about making a series on it. I think a6 is very underrated, especially in faster time controls, and the computer actually likes this. Stockfish, as I'm looking at it now, gives white a 0.31 advantage, which is pretty good. I mean, a6 looks terrible. It's going down now. It's down to 0.22. Now it's going up again. So it's you know, Stockfish always going back and forth. But a6, you know, what does this move do? First off, well, it does two things. It protects b5, so a knight or a bishop cannot go there for the rest of the game, which eliminates a lot of ideas. And on top of that, b5 can be played. Why do I think that a6 is better than h6? Well, because I think with a6, it's very easy to just kind of play b5 at some point and start marching down the queen side. Whereas with h6 and g5, this kind of makes our king vulnerable in a way that a6 and b5 simply doesn't. Okay, you know, one of the ways I've played this personally, I'll play e6, move 2. And notice here, I'm just really trying to cover those light squares well. And okay, now here I can even think about a move like d5, right? Advancing in the center. And now a move like c5. Now I have a French defense, but that is much improved because I've affected white's move order. I have this move of a6. I can play knight c6. I can launch this pawn down like crazy and just make some space. And it leads to a very fun game. Okay, I play this in bullet quite a bit, and it's a lot of fun. So, St. George Defense. Finally, our last pawn move that we're covering, a5 with the Ware Defense. Unlike a6, this doesn't support b5. In fact, it makes it weaker, right? If I'm white, I might just play knight c3, right? Let's just stake out that square, okay? If we play something like c6, sure, it's defended, but then white is just continuing to take control of the center while we're doing who knows what. And if at any point we play the move of knight c6, I mean, white at some point can play bishop b5, and that bishop ain't going nowhere. That bishop's there to stay, right? Because, again, this pawn has moved already to a5, and a6 is not possible kicking that bishop around. Okay, so pawns are very important, right? Pawn moves in the beginning of the game, they might not seem that important. It might seem like you can just make a move like this and you're fine, but it's more than just, oh, we wasted a move. It's actually, wow, this move actually hurt my chances, right? It's giving my opponent outposts and activities and routes into my positions that they wouldn't have had before. Okay, with the pawn back on a7, if white ever drops a bishop here, we can always kick it out, but when we play a5, that's eliminated for the rest of this game. Okay, so not a fan of that move, in all honesty. What next? Well, we have our knight moves. First off, if you go in the chess.com database, it's going to tell you that knight h6 is the hippopotamus defense, and I take personal offense to that. All right, I do. Okay, I'm just going to look at the camera for a second. Okay, because this is getting out of hand. All right. No one I have ever talked to says, besides saying that chess.com says it, no one says this is the hippo. We all know what the hippo is, okay? The hippo is a very good system. When you fianchetto both your bishops, you tug both your knights. Maybe I'm a little bit passionate about this because I've been playing the hippo for so long, but why is this called the hippo on chess.com? Chess.com, please answer me. I'm not even going to talk about the move. I'm just going to talk about the fact that it's called the hippopotamus defense on chess.com, and that shouldn't be. Next up, we got the Alekhine's defense, and this actually is the Alekhine's defense, okay, putting pressure on e4. Now, this is a very interesting move because it seems as if white is just kind of able to kick us around, and guess what? That's exactly what black wants. Okay, so by the way, when I'm playing as white, I personally as white, I just play knight c3. There's nothing wrong with e5. The computer likes it for white. But it's very interesting how fast this game can go south for white, okay? Let's say white kicks this knight. Let's say they kick it again. Well, d5's all of a sudden is a pretty solid square, right? And these pawns are starting to become kind of weak. If you push too hard, you're the one that actually becomes exposed, right? Let's go move back. Let's say white plays a move like d4. We play here. White goes f4 with the pawns attack. Okay, we take, right? White has a very advanced center, but we start kind of slicing and dicing a little bit, right? We start slicing and dicing, okay? We play a move like knight c6, or look at it. Let's say white keeps pushing, right? White starts to expand so much that they're the ones with the weak king. We're looking at knight c2 with check and a fork, winning the rook. Let's say we see a move like knight d4, stopping that and attacking our bishop. Okay, we can take the knight. We can look at a move like e6, right? Now we're looking at ideas like queen h4 with check. For example, bishop e2. All right, let's throw in the queen, right? If you play here, we got queen to e4, and you got two rooks attacked. Okay, so the Alekhine's defense with knight f6, we're inviting the opponent to push their pawns like crazy, but the further they push, the more weak they become, right? That's the idea behind it. And you can do fine against the Alekhine's defense if you study for it as white, but it's tough. And in all honesty, I just don't, as an e4 player, I never cared to study this move a ton, right? I do remember playing it in a tournament and then becoming very uncomfortable with my advanced position, but at a certain point, I just started playing this because it's like, I just don't want to do that. I just don't want to do that. That's what they want, right? From the Alekhine's defense player's perspective, if they play this, we don't have to play a move like e5 and just go into an e5 type opening Vienna game. We can play d5 here with the Scandinavian variation, putting pressure on this pawn. There's different moves that we could see here, including e5 or takes. If they take the pawn, our knight can just capture back. If they play e5, we have some moves here, including knight back, attacking that pawn. Things can get a little bit sharp, but at the end of the day, d5 is a very solid option if you are worried about facing knight c3. This is called the Scandinavian variation, just in case you're Alekhine's defense player and want to look more into that. Okay. Next up, we got this move of the Nimzowitsch Defense with knight c6. I covered a video on this, going into depth, a lot of the lines and variations, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, this is one of the least common moves I've seen in my entire life. I mean, it feels like I've played against the Nimzowitsch Defense like 2 times in my whole life, and I've been playing chess for almost 20 years. It's probably been more than 2, right? I probably just forgot, but honestly, I feel like I never see this move. And it's kind of surprising because according to Stockfish, this is a very viable option. Very viable option. And white, because of the fact that this isn't played a lot, white can fall into trouble here quickly. Okay, this is a very underrated move. All right, let's say white takes control of the center. All right, we play d5. Okay, if e5, right, there's quite a bit of different things that we can do there, but bishop f5 is very solid. If they take on d5, our queen activates. All of a sudden, we're already putting pressure on d4. If a move like knight f3, we can play a move like e5, breaking open this center. Okay, and look, white taking here, we're not worried about it because we're going to take and pin this knight to the king, threatening this pawn. If you want to keep trying to save it, that's fine. We can just keep activating our pieces. If you want to save that pawn, that's fine. We're just getting a lot of development here. And on top of that, we have castling with check on the way as a potential move. Okay. We got moves in the toolbox here to go after these pawns. Remember that this knight is pinned at the moment. We're putting pressure on e5. We're putting pressure on f2. This knight can jump to f5 or to g6. We can castle and get the second rook to e8, just blasting down both center files. This is just one example of what this move of knight c6 with the Nimzowitsch Defense can do. But if you want to find an underrated option for black against e4, I recommend this. Okay. I made a video on it again, and you can check that out. I made a video on a lot of these openings, but I think the Nimzowitsch Defense in particular is very understudied for an e4 player, right? If you talk to an e4 player, they're studying up for the French and the Caro and the Scandi and e5 and the Pirc and all that kind of stuff, and the Sicilian, but they're not looking at this move very much. Okay, most of the time. All right. And the last move that we have, knight a6 with the Lemming Defense. Where do I start, right? I did do a video on this as well, but just because I made a video on it doesn't mean it's good, okay? I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing, right? Why does this help me, I guess is the question. One issue is that white could take here, and from a practical standpoint, double isolated pawns on the side of the board, not a ton of fun. On top of that, where is this knight going? Okay, where is this knight gonna go? I just want to know. I just want to hear it out. Okay, c5 could be good, right? If white gives us time to play like e5 and knight over and all that kind of stuff. But if white plays something like d4, this knight could, it's looking a little bit uncomfortable. I've talked about the idea of c6 and tucking this knight. That's generally speaking, but again, I mean, it's just. Why are we doing this? Okay, so that's kind of what I would finish with, right? Some chess moves are good and they have a very clear purpose, and some chess moves are just straight up strange. Okay, my encouragement to you, right? When you're playing chess, right, and you make a move and you can't answer why, it's probably not the best. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well as hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on anything coming your way. On top of that, I wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of October in 2023. We have some recently added benefits, and I would love for y'all to join the team. I'll see y'all in the next one.